Whispers of famine. Leo's wails knifed through the small cottage, an unceasing indictment of Alara's helplessness. She rocked him, offering a wordless tune, but the sound only seemed to deepen his distress. His little hands curled into tight knots, his face burning crimson and distorted with discomfort. For days, he hadn't known true nourishment, and the watery broth she cobbled together each dawn barely registered in his empty gut. "Quiet now, my lamb," she murmured, brushing a kiss across his brow. His skin felt feverish, parched. A frigid spike of terror pierced her. In the dilapidated meeting hall, dust motes swirled in the stagnant air as the village council convened, heavy with worry. Maeve, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her voice raspy but resolute, addressed the somber gathering. "The situation deteriorates by the hour," she declared. "The spring harvest was a cruel joke. Livestock offer little sustenance. We've petitioned the Earl yet." Her voice trailed off, the unspoken truth a tangible presence. The Earl's indifference to their remote plight was universally understood. A wizened farmer, his cheeks sunken, voiced his fears. "My children grow weaker, Maeve. I doubt they'll endure the coming winter." A low rumble of agreement echoed in the room. Alara wasn't there, but she could envision it all: the lowered heads, the vacant stares, the stifled grief. Thomas would be present, his broad frame a pillar of quiet strength, his hand enclosing hers. That thought sparked a fresh pang of sorrow. That familiar ache settled in her heart. It marked 3 weeks since he'd ventured out, promising to find work in neighboring settlements. 3 weeks of silence, 3 weeks of gnawing hunger. Maeve lifted a hand, quelling the rising wave of despair. "We must carefully measure every morsel. The remaining grain must be strictly rationed, and we must contemplate alternatives." Her gaze swept the assembled villagers, resting on each face, seeking comprehension, acceptance. Cradling Leo, Alara stumbled into the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the wall's fissures, exposing the room's desolation. She crossed to the pantry, her spirits plummeting with each step. She knew emptiness awaited, yet she had to confirm it. The shelves were utterly bare. Dust motes danced in the sun's rays, their abundance an unbearable taunt. A solitary, shriveled potato lay abandoned in the corner, too far gone to offer any sustenance. She lifted it, turning it over in her hand. It felt devoid of life, utterly weightless. Not unlike her dwindling hope. "Léo est intensifié. Aho, urgent plia." Alara sank to the floor, her back against the cold stone wall. She drew him close, tears escaping silently, dampening his wispy hair. "I'm so sorry, my precious," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Forgive me." She remembered Thomas's parting words, his cheerful reassurances before his departure. "We'll pull through, Alara. We always manage." But his optimism now sounded hollow, faint echoes of a life that was fading away. She recalled Maeve's words, alternatives. What loomed before her? Supplication? Theft? She recoiled from the thought. She had never pilfered anything. But the vision of Leo, his fragile body consumed by hunger, overrode her principles. Later, Alara spotted Maeve approaching her dwelling. She rose with difficulty, her joints protesting from exhaustion. She had spent the afternoon combing the fields for any scrap. A few shrunken berries, some fibrous roots, yielding meager pickings. "Alara," Maeve said softly, her eyes pools of sympathy. "How does the little one fare?" Alara swallowed hard, unable to meet her gaze. He's unwell, Maeve. He's starving." Maeve sighed, her shoulders drooping imperceptibly. "I know, child. We all suffer. But rumors abound, Alara. Tales of widespread famine in nearby settlements, too. These are desperate times." She paused, searching for the appropriate words. "Have you considered the workhouse at Oakhaven?" Alara's head snapped up, panic widening her eyes. "The workhouse? But the tales are appalling, Maeve. They say it's a slow death. They leave you to starve, brutalize you." Maeve reached for Alara's hand, enclosing it in hers. Her grasp felt surprisingly firm, warm. I know the stories, child, but sometimes the stories are all that remain, and sometimes they're all that sustain us. It offers a roof, Alara, food, however paltry, and perhaps a chance for Leo. Alara lowered her gaze to her child, his face gaunt and ashen. The workhouse, a grim prospect of final recourse. But what choice remained? Ponder it, Alara, Maeve said gently. Time remains, but precious little. She squeezed Alara's hand, then turned and departed, leaving Alara alone with her thoughts and the unrelenting, grinding whispers of starvation. A mother's choice. The fire sputtered in old Maeve's hearth, a pathetic counterpoint to the deep cold gnawing at Alara. Flickering shadows danced across Maeve's face, carving worry lines like gullies in parched earth. Alara adjusted Leo in her arms, his slight weight a constant accusation of her failings. There might be another option, Maeve offered, her voice a dry rustle, as if drawing the words pained her. She avoided Alara's eyes, fixed on the sediment circling in her tea. A fragile hope fluttered within Alara. Another way to find food? Maeve's sigh was a leaden weight in the small room. It's less than ideal, but would ensure Leo's survival. For a time, at least. Alara's stomach clenched as she waited. Silence descended, broken only by the fire's uneven breaths. Silas Blackwood. Maeve finally uttered the name a poisoned dart in the air. He seeks a household member, a companion. A stark understanding pierced Alara. A glacial dread settled in her bones. She gripped Leo tighter, her fingers aching. You mean, give myself to him? The words were bitter on her tongue. Maeve winced. Not forever, only until the famine lifts. His offer is generous. Sustenance for Leo, medicine if needed, and shelter. Shelter, Alara echoed, the word dripping with irony. In his bed, Maeve offered no reply, her silence a damning indictment. Raw fury erupted, a sudden blaze against the encroaching despair. No, she choked out, rising unsteadily. I won't. I can't. Surely there's another path. We'll forage. We'll plead. We'll... Her voice fractured, the fight leaking out as swiftly as it had ignited. She slumped back, tears carving paths down her cheeks. I can't, she whispered, defeated. Silas Blackwood's image flared in her mind. His predatory grin, his assessing gaze, the way he appraised women, like livestock. The mere thought of his touch curdled her blood. Maeve reached out, her hand hovering hesitantly above Alara's arm. I know, child. It's a cruel thing to suggest, but time is scarce. The workhouse certain death for a babe as tiny as Leo. And for you in due course. Alara buried her face in Leo's blanket, the faint lavender scent, a ghost of better times, offering scant solace. She recalled Thomas, his strong embrace, his tender smile, the promise in his eyes when he departed. I'll return, Alara. I swear it. I'll build us a home, a brighter future. He had been gone nearly a year of withering fields, gnawing hunger, unrelenting anxiety. A year that had etched lines of a decade onto her face. Was he even alive? Had he forgotten her? Had he forged a new life elsewhere? A life untainted by a desolate village and a desperate woman? She gazed down at Leo, his small face creased in sleep, his delicate chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. His future, his pure, defenseless future, rested solely on her. Tears flowed unchecked, a deluge of anguish and heartache. She recalled her mother, the sacrifices she had endured. Was this to be her destiny, to be reduced to a mere commodity? She closed her eyes, Leo's features seared into her memory. A tidal wave of fierce protectiveness overwhelmed her, dwarfing any fear, any aversion. She would do anything, absolutely anything, to safeguard him. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet Maeve's. The old woman's eyes swam with unshed tears, mirroring the suffering of a village teetering on the abyss. Alara drew a shuddering breath. The air tasted of ash and desperation. What does he expect? She croaked, her voice barely audible. The merchant's estate. The trek had been a grueling deception, a far cry from Maeve's understated account. Each dawn brought a renewed assault of aching muscles. Each dusk, a heavier blanket of despair. Leo, dear boy, stayed mostly silent, nestled in his mother's embrace, seemingly attuned to their dire circumstances. Alara eked out the meager bread Maeve had provided, gnawing on paper-thin slices, savoring every last crumb. She supplemented their rations with wild berries whenever fortune allowed, whispering prayers they weren't toxic. Days dissolved into a blur of trudging, brief respites, and fervent pleas for endurance. Dust puffed from beneath Alara's worn boots on the gradually improving road. Imperceptibly, the landscape morphed. The village's scruffy fields relinquished their hold to impeccably tilled acres. Fences, constructed of solid-hewn lumber rather than gathered twigs, now bordered their path. This was foreign soil. Then, cresting a gentle rise, Alara beheld it. Blackwood Estate. More than a residence, it was an ostentatious display. Impossibly high stone ramparts embraced elaborate gardens, bursting with a vibrant palette she'd only imagined. A fountain, sculpted with grotesque figures, gurgled with carefree abandon. The main house, a sprawling manor of dark granite and shimmering panes, clawed at the sky. Plumes of smoke danced from the chimneys, hinting at warmth and solace, comforts absent for years. The contrast with the village was a cruel jest. There, children hunted for refuse. Here, roses flaunted their velvety petals in utter profusion. There, homes were slapped together from mud and straw. Here, the stone facade defied time and elements. The sight stole the air from her lungs. It was the physical embodiment of the gulf between privilege and destitution, a divide she was now forced to bridge. As she drew closer, the estate's immensity grew ever more imposing. Wrought iron gates, intricately adorned with coiling tendrils and ominous ravens, guarded the entrance. Taller than any structure in the village, they loomed, absolute in their authority. A uniformed guard, his features etched with impassivity, stood watch beside them. He followed Alara's approach with unwavering scrutiny. Alara halted just outside the gates, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Leo stirred, sensing her disquiet. She hugged him closer, finding strength in his untainted presence. This was the precipice. She had rehearsed this moment endlessly during their travel, yet reality surpassed even her darkest fears. This wasn't a mere transaction. It was a capitulation, a surrender of her person, her independence, her very being. The perfume of roses, so alluring moments before, now became sickly sweet, suffocating. The fountain's gentle music seemed to mock her trepidation. The promised warmth from the chimneys felt like bait on a trap. Her limbs felt weighted with lead. She yearned to retreat, to vanish into the comforting squalor of the village, to face starvation over this unknown horror. But Leo, she glanced down at his trusting face, his tiny hand gripping her finger. She couldn't forsake him. She wouldn't. Gathering a ragged breath, Alara squared her shoulders. Cowardice was a luxury she could not afford. She would confront this trial, whatever its nature, with what grace she could muster. For Leo's sake. She took a step toward the gate, then another. Each footfall echoed in the sudden stillness, amplifying the tremor in her hands. The guard remained a statue, a silent arbiter awaiting her. One more step. She felt the oppressive weight of the gate's presence. The iron birds seemed to scrutinize her every move. She wondered at the man who awaited her beyond. What sort of being held sway within that opulent cage? Would he be cruel? Demanding? Or perhaps something infinitely more chilling? Indifferent? Doubt gnawed at her resolve, feeding her with wicked questions. Had she doomed them both? Was this simply trading one brand of misery for another? She squeezed her eyes shut, battling the tears that threatened to spill. No, she could not yield to despair. She had to be resolute. When she opened her eyes, her gaze locked with the guard's. His expression remained unchanged, yet she thought she glimpsed a fleeting shadow. Pity, perhaps? In their depths, she swallowed hard, her throat constricted with fear. I am Alara Metasweet, she managed, her voice a mere breath. I'm here for Mr. Blackwood. A coal bargain. Silas Blackwood, framed by a severe obsidian desk, sat beneath a light that cruelly sculpted his features. No invitation to sit was offered. Leo, clutching her skirts, emitted a soft whimper, a sound that seemed to fray the edges of the silence. Blackwood's gaze, glacial and measuring, traveled over Alara, her threadbare dress, the smudge of grime on her cheek, the apprehension shadowing her face. He appraised her like chattel. A shiver crawled beneath her skin. So, he began, his voice a seamless monotone. Alara Metasweet, you understand the terms of your arrangement? Arrangement. The word left a bitter residue. She swallowed, seeking purchase for her voice. I believe I do, sir. Sustenance and lodging for my son and me. In exchange for services rendered, Silas corrected, a subtle tightening at the corner of his mouth. Let's be precise. This isn't philanthropy. You will earn everything you receive. I demand utter obedience, absolute discretion, and unwavering commitment. He tinted his fingers, the lamp catching the dull gleam of a heavy signet ring. Your responsibilities will encompass managing the domestic staff, overseeing the upkeep of the house, and attending to my personal requirements. A prickle of unease traced her spine. Personal requirements? She echoed, her voice barely audible. Ensuring my ease, he amplified, eyes narrowing slightly. Nothing further. Unless, of course, I dictate otherwise. The unspoken implication hung like a shroud. He slid a thick stack of parchment across the polished surface. The conditions are detailed within. Examine it thoroughly. Alara's fingers trembled as she lifted the document. The language was dense and convoluted, riddled with clauses calculated to obfuscate. Skimming through it, her hope dwindled with each line. It was far more onerous than she had anticipated. It shackled her not only to servitude, but to absolute silence and unwavering fealty. She would possess no rights, no appeal, no autonomy. Is there any way to better the provisions for my son? She ventured, her voice strained with suppressed emotion. He requires more than meager leavings. He is growing. Silas' expression remained a mask of indifference. The present allotment is adequate. He shall receive the same portions as the kitchen help. Nothing beyond that. But he's a child, Alara protested, her voice rising with a tremor of desperation. He requires milk, fresh produce, something more substantial than bread crusts and water. That is immaterial to me, Silas declared, his tone implacable. Your sole concern is fulfilling your obligations. The contract is explicit. Execute it or depart. His words hung suspended, stark and uncompromising. Depart, and condemn Leo to a slow starvation. She glanced down at her son, his small face wan and pinched, his eyes mirroring her own dread. She couldn't. She wouldn't. With a sigh that felt like the rending of bone, Alara grasped the quill. The ink felt viscous and cold as she dipped it into the well. She stared at the virgin space on the parchment, the void where her signature would seal her destiny. This was not the life she had envisioned. Not for her, not for Leo. She had dreamed of a humble dwelling, a garden bursting with color, a life graced by small joys. Instead, she was signing herself into a gilded cage, bartering her freedom for her son's continued existence. Her hand quaked as she wrote her name, each character a deliberate act of capitulation. Alara Metasweet. The words seemed to taunt her, a stark reminder of her powerlessness. She pushed the contract back across the expanse of obsidian, her gaze locked on Silas. He retrieved it, his eyes lingering on her signature. A fleeting, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. Welcome to Blackwood Estate, Alara, he pronounced, his voice utterly devoid of warmth. Your service commences now. Leo whimpered again, burying his face deeper into her skirts. Alara knelt, enveloping him in her embrace, her heart shattering. She had saved him, but at what terrible cost? What awaited them in this forbidding, joyless place? She could not know. All she knew was that she had struck a bargain with the devil, and the price was her very soul. Life and service. The wind, a frigid viper, slithered past the warped frame of the Blackwood Estate's pantry window, chasing Elara even indoors. Her stiff digits grappled with the potato sack, the burlap a torment of bristles against the chafed skin of her hands, a microcosm of the larger ache consuming her hollow gut. Silas Blackwood's decree echoed in her mind. The root cellar, organized before nightfall. No appeal. No dispute. The hours blurred. She scoured flagstones until her joints protested with fiery intensity. The caustic lie a burning insult to her cracked palms. Water, precious as jewels in this arid corner of the world, was hauled in heavy pails up the spiraling staircase to fill the opulent tub in Blackwood's private rooms. Silverware gleamed under her tireless buffing, reflecting not her, but a spectral echo of who she once was. Sustenance consisted of miserly portions, watery broth and rock-hard bread, scarcely enough for a field mouse, let alone a woman driven from sunup to sundown. But Elara dared not indulge her own hunger. Every stolen second, every moment outside Blackwood's regimented schedule belonged to Leo. She'd slip into the kitchen, dodging the gaze of Agnes, the cook with the disposition of a storm cloud, and snatch a carrot, a handful of oats, anything to supplement the anemic swill he was given. Tonight, a morsel of salted pork, stringy with fat. She worried it with her teeth, predigesting it before offering it to Leo's eagerly waiting mouth. His miniature hands, like grasping stars, closed around her finger, his eyes shimmering with trust. Guilt clawed at her insides. She was sacrificing herself, weakening with each missed meal, but to see him denied, unbearable. Later, curled beside Leo in their meager servants' quarters, sleep brought no comfort, only specters of memory. Thomas materialized in her mind's eye, standing amidst their humble garden, his hands rough yet gentle as he coaxed life from the soil. She recalled the timbre of his laughter, the delicate fan of wrinkles around his eyes when he smiled. Grief, sharp as a shard of glass, pierced her. He would have abhorred this existence, the person she was becoming. Her dreams turned bittersweet. They danced in the meadow behind their cottage, the air saturated with the perfume of wildflowers. Thomas held her close, his lips tracing a warm path along her neck. But as she nestled into him, his face fragmented, dissolving until only a blurry impression remained. She reached for him, but her hand met only air. Awakening with a choked gasp, her face was slick with tears. Leo stirred beside her, whimpering softly. She gathered him close, burying her face in the soft down of his hair. He was her anchor, all that remained. The following dawn brought no change. The same grueling labor, the persistent gnawing of hunger, the stifling weight of despair. She scrubbed the grand hall's floor when she sensed a presence close behind. No need to look. It was him. Silas Blackwood stood, a silent monolith, his towering form casting a lengthy shadow over her stooped figure. He was, as always, impeccably dressed, encased in a somber, bespoke coat that drank the light. His expression was a mask, impenetrable. Elara kept her head lowered, her hands moving in a weary rhythm across the cold stone. She braced herself for his words, but an unnerving silence stretched between them. Finally, after what felt an eternity, his voice resonated, a low, controlled rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. "You are not consuming enough." Her heart vaulted into her throat. Had he witnessed her clandestine thefts for Leo? Was exposure imminent? She swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I eat what is provided, sir." An eyebrow arched, a fleeting glint of something akin to amusement flickered within his icy gaze. "Indeed, yet your complexion loses color with each passing day. Strength ebbs." He paused, his gaze raking over her, assessing her as if she were merchandise. "A debilitated servant holds little value, Elara." He turned and departed, leaving her trembling in his wake. His pronouncement hung in the air, a chilling reminder of her precarious standing. She was a tool, nothing more, a means to his obscure ends. And should she fail to meet his standards, she would be discarded without hesitation. Later, Agnes, the cook, with a furtive glance and eyes heavy with a pity Alara desperately sought to avoid, slipped her an additional crust of bread. Stale and unyielding, it was consumed with gratitude, each bite savored. As she ate, a resolve hardened within her. She had to endure, not merely for Leo, but for herself. She had to reclaim a fragment of her former self, to stoke the embers of her spirit within this cheerless place. She had to find a means of outmaneuvering Silas Blackwood. Leo's illness. A harsh, rasping cough tore through the stillness, erupting from Leo's frail frame. Alara gasped, jolting upright. The rough straw of her pallet scratched at her skin. Her clandestine candle, plucked from the kitchen and stashed under a floorboard, cast fragile, dancing specters on the low ceiling of the servant's chamber. Her hand flew to Leo, a vice clamping around her heart. He was ablaze with fever. Beneath the thin blanket, tremors racked his small body. The cherubic glow usually gracing his face had been replaced by a fiery flush, his skin slick with perspiration. "Lau, wake up, darling," she croaked, her throat tight with dread. A whimper was his only reply, his eyes sealed shut, his breath a shallow, hurried thing. Panic spiked. This was no mere cold. This was a grave sickness taking hold. She pressed the back of her hand to his brow, recoiling from the intense heat radiating from his skin. Desperate, Alara soaked a scrap of cloth with her meager water ration, carefully dabbing his forehead, his neck, his chest. But he remained lost to her, trapped within the fever's oppressive embrace. Old Maggie, the village's wise woman, lived half a day's journey away, across the perilous moor. A trek impossible with Leo in such a state, and unthinkable without Blackwood's consent. Despair constricted her throat. She needed assistance immediately. Swaddling Leo as best she could, Alara darted from the chamber, her bare feet impacting the frigid stone floor. The manor house loomed before her, a formidable silhouette against the encroaching dawn. Hesitation flickered only for an instant before she raised a trembling fist and pounded against the massive oak door. The thundering echoes filled the silent house, each reverberation amplifying her terror. The door creaked inward, revealing Silas Blackwood. He was swathed in a velvet dressing gown, his features twisted with annoyance. The candlelight behind him lengthened and distorted his shadow, rendering him even more imposing. "What accounts for this intrusion?" he rumbled, his voice a low menace. Alara stumbled forward, tears coursing down her cheeks. "Please, Master Blackwood, I implore you. It's Leo. He's desperately ill." Blackwood's expression remained a mask, his eyes like chips of ice, assessing her. "Sickness is commonplace, Alara. I'm not a healer. But this is far more than a simple ailment," she begged, clutching at his sleeve. "He's consumed by fever. I fear he's failing." The words caught, a sob choking her. Blackwood simply stared down at her, unyielding, seemingly impervious to her anguish. "I can offer no aid." Alara crumpled to her knees, her grip on his sleeve tightening. "Please, Master Blackwood, you have horses in your stable. Send for old Maggie. She alone can save him." Her voice cracked, raw with desperation. She was exposed, vulnerable, divested of all dignity, a mother reduced to pleading, stark terror. "You are aware of our agreement, Alara," Blackwood stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "My resources are not to be squandered on inconsequential matters." "Inconsequential," Alara's voice rose, laced with incredulity. "He's my son, the only family I have. Please, I'll offer anything. Double my labor, bear any hardship, just spare him." She looked up at him, her eyes brimming with a raw, desperate plea. For a moment, Blackwood saw beyond the servant and glimpsed the ferocity of a mother lion protecting her cub. He registered the depth of her devotion, the extent of her willingness to sacrifice. He saw the tenuous spark of hope battling against overwhelming despair. Something shifted in his gaze, a subtle nuance Illyria couldn't quite interpret. Not pity, precisely, but something bordering on comprehension. He remained mute, his eyes fixed on hers. At last, he spoke, his voice softer, almost unrecognizable. "Take me to him." A glimmer of humanity. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway outside amplifying Illyria's anxiety. Silas had barked orders to a stable boy, sending him galloping off into the night, presumably to fetch the physician from Oakhaven. Now he stood by the window, his back to Illyria, a rigid silhouette against the pale moonlight. The only sound was Leo's shallow, raspy breathing and the crackling fire in the hearth. Illyria knelt beside the makeshift bed she'd fashioned from old blankets, her hand resting lightly on Leo's forehead, willing the fever to break. Her own body ached with exhaustion, but she dared not close her eyes, fearing she might miss a crucial moment, a sign that he was getting worse. Finally, the distant sound of hooves pounding on the cobblestones shattered the silence. A flurry of activity erupted outside, hushed voices, the stamping of hooves, and then a firm knock on the door. Silas turned, his expression unreadable. "Enter," he commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. A stout, balding man with a worn leather satchel hurried into the room. Dr. Albright, the physician from Oakhaven, his face etched with concern. He offered a curt nod to Silas and immediately knelt beside Leo, his fingers gently probing the infant's tiny chest. "How long has he been like this?" Dr. Albright asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Since this morning," Illyria croaked, her voice hoarse from crying. "It came on so suddenly." Dr. Albright worked quickly, his movements precise and efficient. He examined Leo's throat, listened to his breathing with a stethoscope, and took his temperature with a small glass thermometer. The air hung thick with anticipation. Silas watched from the window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. After what felt like an age, Dr. Albright straightened up, a frown creasing his brow. "It's a severe lung infection," he announced, his gaze meeting Illyria's. "He's a very sick little boy." Illyria's heart plummeted. Can you help him?" "I can try," Dr. Albright replied, opening his satchel and extracting several small vials and a mortar and pestle. He began mixing a potion, his movements deliberate and focused. The scent of herbs and medicines filled the air, a strange blend of hope and despair. Silas, silent until now, finally spoke. "What are his chances?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, completely unlike the commanding tone Illyria had come to expect. Dr. Albright hesitated, his eyes flicking between Silas and the child. "It's touch and go, Master Blackwood. He's weak, but he's a fighter. We need to get the fever down and clear his lungs." He administered the potion, carefully spooning the bitter liquid into Leo's mouth. The baby coughed weakly, his eyes fluttering open for a moment before closing again. The next few hours were a blur of feverish delirium and anxious waiting. Dr. Albright stayed by Leo's side, constantly monitoring his condition, adjusting the blankets, and administering more of the potion. Illyria remained knelt beside him, praying silently, her hand never leaving his small body. Silas, remarkably, didn't leave the room. He paced restlessly, his usual composure shattered. He looked every bit the anxious father, though Illyria knew he was nothing of the sort. As dawn approached, a faint glimmer of hope appeared. Leo's fever began to subside, his breathing became less labored, and a faint flush returned to his cheeks. Dr. Albright, his face etched with fatigue, finally allowed himself a small smile. "He's turned the corner," he announced, his voice filled with relief. "The worst is over." Illyria burst into tears, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She reached out and grasped Dr. Albright's hand, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart." Dr. Albright squeezed her hand gently. "He's a strong little one. He owes his life to you, his mother." Illyria turned to Silas, who was standing by the window, the first rays of dawn illuminating his face. His expression was still guarded, but there was a definite softening in his eyes. She rose to her feet, her legs shaky, and approached him. "Master Blackwood," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved his life." Silas looked down at her, his gaze intense. "It was Dr. Albright who saved him," he said, his voice gruff. "But you summoned him," Elara insisted. "You paid for his services. You could have refused. I am eternally in your debt." A strange expression flickered across Silas's face, a fleeting glimpse of something Elara couldn't quite decipher. Was it regret? Pity? Or something else entirely? "Just ensure he recovers fully," he said finally, turning away. "That will be thanks enough." He strode from the room, leaving Elara standing there, bewildered and strangely moved. The cold, ruthless Master Blackwood had shown a glimmer of humanity, a flicker of compassion that had saved her son's life. It was a small thing, perhaps, but in the bleak landscape of her existence, it felt like a beacon of hope. The heavy weight on her heart lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile seed of optimism. Perhaps, just perhaps, life under Silas Blackwood wouldn't be a complete and utter hell. But as Elara returned to Leo's side, smoothing the hair from his forehead, she knew one thing for certain. She would do anything, endure anything, to protect him. Her life was no longer her own. It belonged to her son, and she would guard it with every fiber of her being. Unseen kindness. The first sign was the wagons. Elara was returning from a foraging trip, her basket pitifully light with gleaned berries and roots, when she saw them lumbering down the road towards Oakhaven. Not one, but a string of them, heavy with sacks and barrels. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar warmth, flickered in her chest. She hurried after them, her worn boots kicking up dust. As she drew closer, the tantalizing scent of flour and dried meat drifted on the breeze. The villagers, gaunt and hollow-eyed, stumbled out of their homes, their faces etched with disbelief. Children, who had known only the gnawing emptiness of hunger, pointed with trembling fingers. Elara watched as the wagons stopped in the village square. Men, unfamiliar but well-fed, began unloading the cargo. Sacks of flour, cured meats, barrels of apples, even bolts of rough-spun cloth. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Then, a hesitant cheer. But Elara felt a prickle of unease. Such bounty was unheard of. Oakhaven had been forgotten, left to wither. Who would suddenly offer such generosity? She pushed through the throng, her gaze fixed on the wagons. They were unmarked, but the horses she recognized them. Black Frisians, their coats gleaming like polished obsidian. Horses from Blackwood Estate. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. This couldn't be a simple act of kindness. Silas Blackwood never did anything without a reason. Ignoring the grateful cries and the scramble for supplies, Elara turned and began to run. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed in protest, back towards the looming silhouette of Blackwood Manor. She arrived breathless, her chest heaving. The gate stood open, unguarded. She slipped inside, her senses on high alert. She had to know. She found him in the library, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. He was standing before the fireplace, a book in his hand, though he wasn't reading. His expression was unreadable. "You," she said, her voice hoarse. Silas turned, his gaze meeting hers. "Elara." "The wagons," she accused. "The food. It was you, wasn't it?" He didn't deny it. He simply inclined his head. "Yes." "Why?" The question burst from her, raw and bewildered. "Why would you do this?" He closed the book and placed it on a nearby table. The sound echoed in the silent room. "Does there always have to be a reason?" "With you, there always is." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowed. "What do you want in return? A flicker of something? Pain? Regret?" Crossed his face. "Nothing. I don't believe you." She planted her feet, refusing to be intimidated by his size, his wealth, his power. "Tell me the truth." He sighed a long, weary sound. He walked to the window, his back to her. "There was a time when I was less than charitable. My father," he instilled in me a certain ruthlessness, a belief that weakness should be exploited, that only the strong deserve to survive. He paused, his shoulders slumping slightly. I profited from the suffering of others. I hoarded grain while people starved. I drove farmers off their land. I built my fortune on the backs of the desperate. Alara remained silent, listening. When I saw the state of your village, he continued, his voice low, it reminded me of things I'd rather forget, things I'd thought I'd buried. He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. I can't undo the past, Alara, but perhaps I can atone for it. In some small way. Atonement, Alara scoffed, though a sliver of doubt crept into her heart. You think feeding a few starving villagers will erase years of cruelty? No, he admitted, but it's a start, and perhaps it will ease my conscience. He looked at her, his gaze searching. Don't misunderstand me, Alara. I'm not suddenly a saint. I still have obligations, but I can't stand by and watch people suffer needlessly. Not anymore. Alara stared at him, trying to reconcile the cold, calculating man she knew with the one standing before her, confessing his guilt. She saw a vulnerability she hadn't seen before, a weariness that seemed to go beyond the burdens of wealth and power. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice softer now. Because you deserve to know, he said simply. Because you're not a fool. You would have found out anyway. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, and because I wanted you to understand. Alara didn't know what to say. She had come to accuse, to demand answers, to protect her son. But she had found something unexpected, a confession, a glimpse of humanity in the heart of a man she had believed to be devoid of it. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and unanswered questions. Finally, Alara broke it. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Then, she turned and left the library, leaving Silas Blackwood alone with his ghosts. A shared future. The library's hush was a palpable weight, broken only by the hearth's rhythmic pops and the wind's mournful cry. Alara's gaze locked on Silas, his unexpected words, freedom, reverberating within her like a discordant chord. Freedom, the very thing she'd sacrificed for Leo's continued existence. I don't comprehend, she rasped, the sound swallowed by the storm's fury. Silas pushed himself up from the chair, his movements more hesitant than she recalled. He drifted to the window, his gaze fixed on the bare branches raking against the turbulent sky. Oak Haven, I leached it dry. My family, for generations, bled it of its vitality. My wealth grew as your kin withered. He turned, his gaze stripped of its usual icy resolve, revealing an unsettling earnestness. Granting you freedom, it's a paltry gesture. It doesn't mend the wounds. He hesitated, searching for precision. I intend to restore your land, Alara, your family's farm, to rebuild your legacy, not from pity, but to redress the past. Alara's breath snagged at her throat. He was offering more than she'd dared to hope, more than she deemed worthy. A knot of guilt formed in her stomach. Had she been utterly wrong about him? Was this merely a sophisticated manipulation, a subtler leash? Why? She challenged, the word edged with skepticism. Silas released a weary sigh, raking fingers through his already rumpled hair. Because the weight of what I've done is crushing. Because I now recognize Oak Haven's latent potential, the tenacity of its people, tenacity I deliberately destroyed. And because his gaze caught hers, held it, I see an unyielding spirit within you, Alara, one that refuses to be quenched. He approached, diminishing the space between them, yet now there was no threat, only supplication. I seek not a servant, Alara, but a co-architect. Collaborate with me to resurrect Oak Haven. Assist me in rectifying the damage. The proposition hung between them, fragile as spun glass. A partnership with Silas Blackwood? An absurdity, yet the genuineness ringing in his tone, the vulnerability reflected in his eyes, felt undeniable. And Leo? She managed, her voice unsteady. Leo is your son. That bedrock remains unaltered. He stays with you, shielded from harm, empowered with a tangible future in a flourishing Oakhaven. Alara closed her eyes, reeling. This was not the callous tyrant she had envisioned. This was a man ravaged by remorse, yearning for expiation, extending to her an opportunity to forge anew from the ashes. Deliberately, she opened her eyes, meeting his stare squarely. The inner fire pulsed, rekindled by burgeoning hope. "I accept," she whispered, the words soft yet resolute. A faint smile touched Silas' lips, a mere suggestion of a smile. "Then we shall begin." The ensuing years were a whirlwind of strenuous labor, unwavering resolve, and unexpected accord. Silas, relinquishing portions of his holdings, channeled resources into Oakhaven, not just finances, but expertise, frameworks, and a genuine zeal for enabling its inhabitants. Alara, possessing inherent comprehension of the terrain and fierce devotion to her community, became the bedrock of the renewal effort. Fields long fallow burgeoned anew, dilapidated dwellings were restored, and the town square, formerly a symbol of blight, teemed with vitality. Silas and Alara labored in tandem, their initial distrust yielding incrementally to mutual regard, then to something deeper, akin to trust. One crisp autumn afternoon, after years had passed, Alara and Silas stood atop a rise surveying Oakhaven. The village throbbed with life, echoing with children's peals of laughter and the cadence of everyday discourse. Fields of gold rippled toward the horizon, a visual testament to their unified aspiration and steadfast commitment. Below, in the newly constructed village square, Leo, now a vivacious 6-year-old, frolicked with other youngsters, scattering pigeons. His laughter, pure and unadulterated, carried on the breeze. Alara reached for Silas' hand, her fingers interlacing with his. The hand, once emblematic of her bondage, now imparted a sense of grounding. They stood, wordlessly comfortable, observing Leo's play. He embodied their shared future, a future erected upon restitution, clemency, and the enduring potency of hope. The famine was a hazy recollection, superseded by the anticipation of abundance and the unwavering conviction in a brighter epoch. The once merciless Lord had morphed into a partner, a confidant, and perhaps something more profound. And Alara, the desperate mother who had traded herself to safeguard her offspring, had discovered not just emancipation, but a devotion she never imagined possible, blossoming amidst the detritus of a broken realm. The fire within her blazed more intensely than ever, fueled by affection for her son and the quiet fortitude of the man alongside her.